Well, hey, everybody, happy Wednesday. It is Wes McDonald, and welcome back to another episode of Level Up Live, the live stream. And you can see me bopping away to a little music there in the countdown timer. I just cannot get enough of that. And apparently, I'm on my own today. Kenneth Edmonds is actually traveling. And for those that tune into the show on a regular basis, you see that he is often traveling in a lot of different places. So I think today he's actually pretty close to home. He's actually just in Orlando. But certainly that's one of the things that we love to know is where you are watching from. So wherever you're watching from throughout the show, let us know. Also, don't forget to leave your comments and questions if you have them. Certainly, we can answer them live on the show, which is always fun. If you're watching a rebroadcast of this on LinkedIn, YouTube, or Facebook, you can leave your comments and questions there too. And we will get to them because that's what we do. So I'm super excited today. One of the things that I've been doing for over 20 years is working remotely, and that is the topic that we're covering today. So it couldn't be any near and dear to my heart for what some of the benefits are, what some of the challenges are. And of course, you don't want to hear me talk for half an hour. So we've brought an expert in who actually takes this to an all new level. So without further ado, hey, Allie Green, welcome to the show. How are you?
Hello. Thanks so much for having me. I'm really excited to chat with you today.
Yeah, well, thank you so much. So you've written a great book, and we'll get into a little bit of that soon enough, talking about remote works, right? And I think it's one of the coolest things now to see that it is, I don't want to say mainstream, but I want to say that there are experts out there that can help people to better manage how they're working remotely. So one of the things that we always do is ask where you're watching from. And s'il vous plaît, if you wouldn't mind, where are you watching from?
Yeah, so I am coming in live from rural France. So outside my window, there's a lot of vineyards and cows and horses. So talk about working remotely, right?
Oh, très bien. Yeah, it's I'm half French Canadian. I know it's not the same, but as we were talking about before the show, France is one of my favorite places to be. So, and look at this world we live in. Speaking of remote work, being able to actually do a show together, literally from across an ocean, right? So, thank you very much for joining in. And it looks like we've got Greg Walters. You're going to see that he's going to join us in from Florida. New camera, Greg says. Yes. And just for your interest as well, Greg, I'm actually using an NVIDIA graphics card, and I'm not sure if you do the same thing, but it's got some pretty cool capabilities, so check it out. And surprise, surprise, Greg Walters again. Hey, hey. And Greg is multi-platform, so we'll generally see him, and he says bonjour.
Bonjour, right. Greg.
Well, that's great. So remember, folks, let us know where you're watching from, and if you have any questions, etc., let us go. And I want to dive right in because you're doing this right now, right? That remote work, I think, for the longest time was kind of a niche thing. And then came the pandemic, and a lot of folks were literally forced into having to figure out ways to work from home. And I don't think necessarily everyone did, as good a job as others. And some people did a great job, right? But there was such a disparity. The other thing is, it seems as we're moving, sort of beyond pandemic measures, that it's really a lot of back and forth on whether remote work is something we should do or shouldn't do. So I would love to talk with you, through that. So, first of all, what are your thoughts on the state of remote work in 2023 and beyond?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting what's happening right now. Obviously, there's a lot of controversy around the future of work and what is going to happen right now. It seems that we're at a crossroads of return to office or remote work. And like the media tends to do, because it does make for more entertaining stories, it's pitting people against each other, saying that there has to be one right way. And you're seeing a lot of arguments for the office or for remote work. And as someone who has been working remotely since 2014 in lots of different capacities, living in the United States, traveling full time, having a home base and moving around, working with an international team, the benefits of remote work, and I'm sure you can attest to this as well from your background here, it's more than just where you're located. It's more than just the commute. And so what I think is missing from a lot of these conversations is truly why people are opening their eyes to remote work and the benefits for the companies being things like this global talent pool, having a complete global reach in terms of more user experience and learnings from local markets, having global coverage for IT support and customer service, and personal benefits as well. It's not just about location flexibility. It's also about when do you individually feel at your most productive, and when are you going to create the best value work for the company that you're creating work for? And I think that we all need to remember that being told that you're going to do your best job from 9 to 5 in a certain environment, we've proven that that isn't true, and people just haven't had enough time to build that muscle yet.
It's true, and I'll speak to two things you said there because they really resonated with me. Right, one was this idea of talent, right? Being able to, and that's another thing we've covered on the show, right? Is constantly people are trying to find out how to get the best talent, and that there seems to be a shortage of talent and everything else. And I've helped people. People have come to me and said, "Wes, somebody would make a great, managed print specialist in North Dakota?" And I say, "Well, I know someone that can work for you there, but remotely." And when it gets shut down, it's like instantly you've kind of shallowed this pool of excellent candidates, right? And that second thing, and actually maybe I'll get you to speak to this. You mentioned having a home base and being able to move around because you're also a digital nomad, right? You said, I think, maybe talk a little bit about that remote lifestyle where you can actually be in France for a period of time, and then what else do you do when you're on the road?
Yeah, I mean, last week I was in Portugal. Next week I'm going to the UK. So my life has been, through certain eyes, very glamorous and exciting in terms of this travel. And when I really take a step backwards and I think, why am I doing this? I think to other people that work remotely that maybe they're caretakers or they are from a developing country and they didn't want to move or have to immigrate for a job. And for me, travel, this comes from a place, I think, of known privilege, but travel for me has been so much part of my soul. And I grew up in the US. We were talking before the show that I feel like I'm an honorary Canadian because I went to Canada often in my childhood and I studied there in university. And I always felt in my traveling, I studied abroad in Europe, I was learning new things about myself. There was an important piece of this mental workout that I had when I was a foreigner and I had to problem solve. How do I get around this city? How do I live my life not speaking the language? And these intellectual workouts made me feel more confident in myself. They've helped me overcome like personal traumas that I've had. They've made me feel like I was more connected. When growing up, I didn't necessarily know who my community was. And it wasn't until I felt an international community of other remote workers, people that wanted to live their life differently, where I was like, oh, yes, these are my people. And relating that back to work, what it meant for me is previously as the head of people in an HR role, I was able to really have empathy for the different life situations that my team was in and think about how do we create strategies and benefits at our company, knowing that I've now traveled and I've lived what their life looks like in different time zones, in big cities and small towns, to see, like, is there a co-working space available? Do we have meetings at really inconvenient times for them? Are we trying to have too much of a US culture in this company and people don't understand the slang words that we're using? And so there's no sense of belonging or connection. There's all these really subtle nuances that you can bring to your workplace through your own lived experiences. And being a digital nomad, for me, having the flexibility to travel and work has meant that I've been able to find myself and find my community and be a stronger employee and now business owner and author because I've been taking these risks. I've been problem solving. I've been finding creativity through travel.
Yeah, and I think it's funny that one of my favorite expressions, and we see it thrown around all over the place, right? Which is get out of your comfort zone. And if it's a senior executive talking to a new hire or coaching someone or a department, it's always like you got to get outside of your comfort zone. You got to try this to get past this hurdle or whatever. And yet, for some reason, when it comes to the office, it's like, well, except for that. So, like our comfort zone is the office. That's where we feel most productive. That's where we feel we have the most control. It's what we're comfortable with. So make sure you get outside of your comfort zone, except for that, right? So
it makes sense in a way. Like, people have been promoted up this career ladder, and so they know that they're successful where they are because of what's gotten them there. And so why stray out of that line of thought or that narrative? Except now the whole world has changed. And if you're not embracing these things, I think there is a sense of being left behind. But it's scary for people who are being told you need to change, but everything you've done so far has made you successful. And so, especially for managers and leaders of companies, getting out of your comfort zone is easier said than done. And in our book, like, I talk about this subtly through a lot of the chapters. There's a section called Allie's Advice, but my number one piece of advice is always you have to unlearn what society has taught you in order to be able to experiment and relearn what works for yourself.
Well, that advice was good enough for from Yoda as a Jedi Master. It should be good enough for the rest of us.
There we go. I love the Star Wars reference. I just talked about that at dinner 2 nights ago.
Oh, I'm an Star Wars geek. If I can find a way to tie it into an episode, I'll do it.
Check.
And we've got, actually, Greg did want to ask, he said, in general, what are your feelings around this concept of the 15-minute city as it pertains to remote work?
So I'm curious what the 15-minute city is.
Yeah, I am too, and I've heard the expression before, but I'm not familiar with it, and I'm wondering if it means this concept of being 15 minutes away from everything, right? So your groceries, your doctor, your lawyer, your everything, right? And he's going to explain it for us. Okay, sorry. I'm pretty sure that's what he's getting to, is that this concept, and perhaps I'm wrong. Maybe the only way to have a 15-minute city is to do it virtually. So let's see what
I feel a lot of suspense.
So Greg, we'll come back when I see your comment there, and we'll get started. Actually, you mentioned sort of the book, right? So let's start moving into that. I'm going to put a little picture up here just for a second, where everyone can see that you can get the book on Amazon, Remote Works, and you did this in conjunction with Tamaris Anderson. And as you scroll down, some really wonderful words from folks that have actually read the book already. And you can find that here yourself, but I'll just, read off some of the stuff here. Do not be afraid to challenge status quo. It's just as important to stop and shift work activities as it is to start them. Sometimes you need to let go of old mental models and projects to make room for new challenges. I really like that. And that was from your fellow co-author. And in Joint Together, it's okay to dream bigger, want more, and question assumptions. Once you question one thing, you can ask everything. Oh, I love that quote. That is the essence of the future of work. So folks can get over there. And I do want to start moving through some of the things in the book. Looks like Greg might have come back with some clarification. So let's see what we have there. He said, yeah, basically, yes, Paris is looking at it. And yes, everything is 15 minutes away. So he is talking, looks like, about a physical, allocation, right? It's become a political hot topic. And it's been talked about here in Chicago and New York City. And that's one that always comes back too, right? Is this idea of, I guess, a driverless culture. Does that make sense? Kind of like in the old days when we lived in small villages. And I live in a small town now. So I live in a 15-minute city or / town, right? Where you can get access to everything. And so I guess he's asking what your thoughts are on that.
This is awesome. I am just hearing about this for the first time, so I can't wait to go down an internet rabbit hole later tonight. Thank you, Greg. I'm going to be up till 4 a.m. No, I think that this is really interesting because there's two really extreme ways that you could take this as it relates to remote work. So one, with the introduction of remote work, especially if your company and you yourself are behind true time flexibility, you're removing this need for an always on culture. And therefore, things do not need to be 15 minutes away. And I think that that's going to really question how people are living and how towns are created. So maybe you don't need to have that quick errand and be able to quickly go to the grocery store because you need to fit it in between meetings or get it done on your weekend. If you have unlimited amount of time to go to a local's farmer's market or to be able to travel and get access to the things you need, you can enjoy a slower pace of life with and because of remote work. I've definitely experienced living in a full range of communities, from rural areas in developed countries to towns and cities in developing countries to New York, Philadelphia, Montreal. And each one posed its challenges. And I would say those challenges in all three were intensified when I was living my life according to somebody else's schedule and somebody else's expectations, when I knew that I had to be sitting in an office Monday to Friday from 9 to 5. Now that I have full authority of how I spend my time and where I spend my time, I really like to play and experiment with how I manipulate that. So, for example, right now I'm in quite a rural area. Tomorrow, I'm planning on taking a train into a city. And while I'm there, I'm going to go to some specialty markets and get access to things. There's one particular market with a lot of hot sauces that I like to get. And I'm going to make sure I go there when I'm done working at the coffee shop I'm going to, and I'm done doing some of the in-person community events that I'm going to. And I really now think about a work day not as a work day, but like a whole experience. And same thing for going to a doctor. I don't need to go to the doctor right in my town. I can go to the specialist that makes sense for my needs because I can work in the lobby. I don't need to take that day off. I can make up for that time later. But I do think more and more the concern is there fair access to people in all communities, and how are governments and companies working together to solve for that, especially in more rural areas. So having the choice to go seek it out for yourself is a luxury. Making sure it does exist for everybody everywhere is a necessity. And how do we come to terms with that is the bigger question that I'm very excited to go read more about.
It is, and you know what? It's getting bigger, right? We talk about this idea. I saw someone pose it once, and it really struck my brain when we were talking about remote work. And they said, "Well, one of the big problems that we have today is meeting equity." And I said, "Well, talk to me a little bit more about meeting equity." And they said, "Well, West, you have a great camera setup. You know, you have the technology. You've got 2 monitors. You've got this, whole setup. What if someone else who's has to work remotely? What if their company's not supporting them with the technology they need, right?" And it really struck me that there is this that we've always talked about, the digital divide, right? And certainly the remote work experience does have that. And I think it's something we've really got to be passionate about, is trying to make sure that not only for those that are fairly well off, that they have kind of a remote equity experience, but that this becomes normalized for everybody, right? And it's probably you touched on one other thing there, and I'm going to jump around. I did have my notes here in different order, but reframing productivity, right? And you had mentioned this earlier because it really resonated with me, and it's how I work. My most productive creative time every day, almost without fail, is between 5 a.m. and 9 a.m. So when I'm writing blogs or I'm doing video edits or other things that require some creativity, right? That's my magic time. And later in the afternoon, that's when I get down to more tasks that are almost robotic, right? Like, I have to do this, I got to get these off my checklist, I have to do these kind of things. And then also in the afternoon, that I shop for my dinner items almost daily now, right? So kind of a very European approach to cooking, because I live close to where I have to go get my groceries and things. So I can finish at 4:30 and do that, because I love that part of the day, right, to be able to go and kind of do those things. So it's definitely a different look at productivity, right? So maybe talk about that a little bit and how you approach that in your book.
Yeah, I love what you just shared about how you're structuring your day, because it touches on a lot of theoretical concepts that we've been able to weave into our book. And so when you think about productivity, the mistake that a lot of people make is they think about how much they can get done, and then they think about how fast or in what time frame they can do it. So a lot of people conflate time management with productivity. They think about checking things off their to-do list. And that's not the true definition of productivity. Productivity is all about enhancing the value. So you're either creating something, you're building something, you're altering or tweaking, you're making progress. And what that looks like when you have more levers to pull is that you can make progress on things in different ways. And so Tam and I noticed this in our own lived experiences prior to writing the book, both of us as digital nomads, and realizing that depending on the time zone or the country we're in, depending on the requirements of external clients and internal team meetings or schedules like that, that we felt our productivity changed from time to time. And so we started to really interview other people that we talk in the book with about how they structure their day. And we heard stories similar to yours. And then we sat down with someone, her name is Dr. Sahar Youssef, who really was able to academically and scientifically back all of the qualitative gatherings that we had been observing out in the real world so far. And there are two interesting things that she told us that we included in the book. One is that the idea of the early bird and the night owl is true. People do have natural chronotypes. And so the type of creative and heads down work that you're able to do, and you're able to do it faster and with more energy and with more intention, changes depending on your chronotype. And so the adage of being productive from 9 to 5 does not work for people. Tam, my co-author, is a true night owl. She will just like go through our project management tool and add all of these like amazing, insightful notes. Her nighttime while I'm sleeping, and I'll wake up to having a lot of work to be able to run off the cuff with. When she was working a corporate job in consulting, she had to wake up at 5 or 6 a.m. To do the commute, and she had to get work done in the middle of the day. And it was almost impossible for her because she couldn't lean into her natural chronotype. I joke, I love non-linear days. So I like working in big chunks, similar to you, it sounds, because I need that afternoon time. I need that morning time. I need big breaks, which is the second point Dr. Sahar Yosef talks about, which is the importance of taking little micro breaks throughout the day. Anywhere from 5 to 15 minutes, but often will help you like reclaim your energy and not be burnt out to continue forward on your task. And it's funny because I read that from her and I thought of my own productivity hack that I always was like, I created this thing and it's great. And then here's this academic doctor backing it up, which is one place, one goal, where I physically would go to one spot to work on a very specific task. And when I finished it, I would leave. I would take my break. I would move my body. I would go to a new spot and work on a new task. And so I would have all of those little breaks built in throughout the day. And the nonlinear workday, I think, is such an important thing to talk about when you talk about remote work that often gets overlooked because we're conflating remote work with only the physical location.
Yeah, and I think there's something about experience too, right? And from a very young age, one of my favorite things was discovering new cafes, right? I love cafes.
Same.
And the idea of being able to explore a new space and to be able to produce work in a new space is just so appealing, right? So I love that whole concept of one place, one goal, go in, get it done. It's almost, not to compare things to the military, right? But you've got a mission. It's like, get in, do the mission, get out, and then prepare for the next mission, right? That's how you're stronger. You're taking the time to prepare for the next one. I love it. Hey, I wonder if we could talk a little bit. One of the things that's difficult enough, even in a normal office, right, is managing conflicts. So what kind of advice do you have, for, folks working remotely about this issue?
Yeah. So my number one piece of advice here is don't be afraid of conflict. I think we're humans. We're naturally not comfortable dealing with conflict, but not all conflict is negative. And in remote work, the absence of conflict can actually be a red flag because it means that people don't feel psychologically safe or they don't know the outlets in which to communicate tension or constructive feedback about the work product itself. And so when it comes to conflict at work, I think the thing to remember is number one, you need to have a phase of conflict as you're building what your team norms are to settle in to the pace in which you're going to work with each other. So especially now just talking about productivity, if I'm a morning person and everybody else on my team is a night owl, and it's important to us to have synchronous meetings, when are we going to have that? That already will create some sort of conflict around what are the expectations of the team? How synchronous are we going to be versus asynchronous? Are we going to have team meetings? Who's making the compromise? And it's not until we establish those norms and that conflict gets resolved can we perform as a team. So I think right there alone is like, when it comes to conflict, it's better to talk it out than ignore it and hope it goes away.
Yeah, and I think too, kind of the the forums like the one we're working on today, right? I actually host a weekly meeting with a group of folks called the Top 100, we never have 100, but 15 or 20 people will show up on a weekly basis. And it's just kind of an open forum, right? And we talk about things that are, I guess you could say, frictional in the industry. And there's, surprisingly a lot of competitors on that call. And the amount of work that goes back and forth just because we're discussing those things and people know it's a safe place, right? That they can actually have a difference of opinion and we can kind of work through those things. And maybe we come up with a consensus on some of those things and maybe we don't, right?
Yeah.
And so I think the technology definitely helps. I know that that's a lot of people's fear is that, hey, how can you manage conflict if you're not in the same room together, right?
And there's lots of ways. I think it again goes to getting to know your personality type. Some people like to know and have the conflict up front and digest it privately. And so using tools and technology to share feedback in a written form or a Loom video, and have someone be able to digest it, ask their questions, and then re-present it to someone. And by doing it asynchronously, which means later communication, you give people breathing room. You give people time to express their emotions privately and in their own safe personal environment and be able to respond to, I think this is an important distinction, the task conflict, not the personal conflict. So
Right.
personal conflict should be resolved. Like there should hopefully not be, people feeling unsafe or people creating a toxic culture. That's something that's going to come up when you create your team norms and expectations. But friction around the task, friction around how do we innovate, how do we problem solve, let's disagree and make the value stronger, that's great. And the more that you can do that in a respectful way, the better the outcome will be.
Yeah. And, I love learning, right? And, certainly conflict is a great way to learn, provided, as you say, that it's framed correctly. And I know me personally, I do like to have that time to get away from it for a while and to think about it. And I work with a guy named Joel Vaslow, who's one of the best leaders that I've ever known. And he always says, well, let's reframe this in 3 new ways, right? So what are 3 ways that we might be able to solve this? You don't have to come back to me today. Let's get together in a couple of days or whatever. And I like that. And, when you think about it, another piece of advice, which is universal, you mentioned earlier, you had an idea which you thought you invented to see that it was backed up by somebody else. I don't think there's anything such thing as a new idea, right? But this concept of if you're going to make a major decision in your life, sleep on it, right? How many times have we heard that? It's like, if you're going to do anything major, don't do it, right as soon as you think about it. Take 24 hours and then come back to it and see if you still, feel the same way, because you also have this opportunity. I think it happens unconsciously for me a lot of the time, where solutions kind of work themselves out. It's not even a conscious idea in my head, right? So I really like that.
Yeah.
Hey, one of the things I want to move into now is this idea of creating an authentic team, just in interest of time, because we do have a few minutes left. And let's talk about this. How do we create an authentic team, and is it important?
So 100% it's important for all the reasons we just talked about, creating a psychologically safe environment, knowing that everybody is their own special snowflake. And that means that tension might arise because people have different working style preferences. It's important to really lean into that personalization while at the same time maintaining team norms. So how you do that is, one, by giving space for people to figure out how they work best. You can do that through things like a working styles. Like we have a Mad Libs quiz in our book to help you think about things like, how do I like to receive feedback? Where do I like to work? We also have a tool called an energy tracker, again, to help you figure out when am I most productive. And then once everybody has learned more about themselves, create space for you to share those things. And then think about, where do we see similarities on our team? What are the themes that are popping up, and where are the differences, and what team norms can be established around those differences? In order to truly create an authentic team, I think buy-in is very important about standard operating behaviors, how you treat each other. And so documenting that in both individual user guides, this is who Allie Green is as a person, as a worker, and also a team guide, this is how I fit into the team, is going to be incredibly important for visibility, transparency, and trust in a remote organization.
I love it. And with that, I think we're coming down to the bottom of our time together today. And I cannot thank you enough, because I know it's later in the afternoon for you. And certainly for all of our viewers that have tuned in today, hopefully have really gotten some, good advice and some things to think about. And just make sure that you do head out. You can get it on Amazon to get out there and get your hands on the book. You can get it in Kindle and paperback, and you can see the options which are available there. Absolutely, highly recommend that you do this to get a better grasp on what it is to work remotely. And I cannot thank you enough. So, what are you going to be doing with the rest of your day now that it's
Thanks so
toward the end?
much. Yeah, this was really fun. I could have talked about this for hours. The rest of my day will probably involve picking up some delicious food and cooking dinner. And now doing a lot of research online about the 15-minute city. So thank you, Greg.
All right. Well, thank you very much. And until next time, everybody, remember, as I love to say, keep learning.